Hello, my friend, and welcome to the study. It's been a long week. We've been very busy, and now it's time for some peace and calm and quiet and some absolute ablative. So relax, sit back, and enjoy the sounds of glass and handwriting as we go over the use of the Ablative Absolute in Latin. Mix some shots, those little vodka shots, to help us along with our handwriting. And I will keep you company while you relax. First, let's thank this month's Patreon supporters of the study. So thank you to everyone watching. It's wonderful to have you here in this study, and special thanks to our Patreon supporters. Carmen 1000, thank you. There's a dog outside who's thanking us as well. Pirate Carrie, thank you. Romulus, thank you, thank you. And David M, thank you. Your support of the study means a lot to me and to the continuing creation of videos, which I hope you will all continue to enjoy. And I certainly enjoy making them for you. It's a very blustery, rainy, windy day outside. We have storms coming through from the west, cloudy, rainy and windy, and then the storm passes and there's some sunshine, and then it rains again. So it is a perfect day for reviewing our Ablative Absolute. And I have a frosty, cold bottle of Absolute right here. Because what are ablatives without it? So we'll start out by making a little Absolute Ablative fizz. I'm going to use this little glass. This is from a wine festival in Constance in Switzerland, where there was famously a big meeting in the Middle Ages where Friedrich's son was knighted, and thousands came, and there were jousting tournaments and lots of festivities. And now every year there's a wine festival. Ideally, we could make one of these Ablative Absolute shots with a shot glass or any small glass with a very thick bottom, and one that ideally you can cover with the heel of your hand. So let's go make one. put a towel on the table to protect it, because it can get a bit messy. And we'll take our vodka and put just a little bit in the bottom of the shot glass. And then to top up, you can use lemonade, 7-Up. I'm going to use the San Pellegrino Aranciata because it's not quite as sweet. But if you like sweet things, Sprite will also do. Any kind of fizzy citrus. Then we put our hand tightly on the top of the glass and pop! There we have our fizz. Now that we've got our Ablative Absolute Fizz, we're ready to do some Ablative Absolutes. I've got some scrap paper here, paper that we've worked on before. Do you remember? We'll use the other side today. And we're going to be looking at translating ablative absolutes into and out of English. So, Latin to English and English to Latin. Ablative absolutes always pose a few translational problems. So we'll go over some of these and hopefully clear things up a bit. I'll try to do my best handwriting. Now the main traits of ablative absolutes in Latin are that there is a noun or a pronoun connected to a participle, and both of these together are in the ablative case. The ablative case, meaning by, with, or from, and in a phrase like this, indicates time when a cause or attendant circumstances. How is this expressed in English? Well, we have a couple of sentences to illustrate why it would be an ablative absolute. So in English, for example, we can have the train being late. I missed my connection. Here we can see that the train being late is an attendant circumstance to the main clause, I missed my connection. If we take it away, we still have the main clause that can stand by itself. This might seem misleading because a definition of ablative absolute is that the ablative can stand by itself, hence absolute. But when we're trying to disentangle this in English translation, we have to think of the main clause standing alone without that ablative absolute. And in this case, the train being late, the attendant circumstances, I missed my connection. We can rephrase that from a present participle in English to with the train being late, because the train was late, as the train was late. But if we were going to say something like, the train being late was traveling at high speed. So we can see that because the train was late, it was traveling at high speed. It is connected. Yes, we do have attendant circumstances. However, we have a verb here and the subject here. The train was traveling at high speed. Being late in English is a present participle phrase, meaning it is adjectival, also meaning that it's describing train. The late train was traveling at high speed. In English, we render that with a present participle because it gives us a reason, a cause. In Latin, however, because the train is part of the main clause, we must use a regular participle, so something describing the train in the nominative, which brings us to our second factor. We have three participles in Latin. We have our present active, we have perfect passive, and future active. Present active is for things happening at the same time. As the main clause or the main verb. And perfect passive, the ablative absolute happens before, and for future active, it happens after the main verb. Today we'll just be looking at perfect passives. If we need an active sense, we can use a deponent verb that looks passive, takes the passive form, and stays active in meaning. To begin, let's look at this Latin sentence. Pecunia accepta Sibylla libros tradidit. So what we have is an ablative absolute here. Money received. Because this is in the ablative, we have a noun and a participle. We can translate this several different ways. Having accepted the money, after she accepted the money, when the money had been accepted, with the money having been accepted, or received rather. So, in English, what happens is we actually relate this ablative absolute phrase to the main clause where the Latin does not. And that can be some source of trouble for translating from English to Latin. So here we'll say, having received the, I'm writing too fast here, money, having received the money, the Sibyl handed over the books. I'm going to account my sloppy handwriting to the vodka. So what we have is the money having been received. We can say the money having been received, the Sibyl handed over the books in English, just like the train being late. Or we can involve the subject of the main clause. Having received the money, the Sibyl handed over the books. The Sibyl, having received the money, handed over the books. Let's do some more. So just to review, if the noun and pronoun which the participle qualifies stands in the main framework of the sentence, or the main clause of the Latin sentence, or is referred to in the main clause, it cannot be an absolutive absolute. So let's show an example of what's not an ablative absolute. Octavianus, magnam, classem, paratam, contra Antonium duxit. Do you like the sound of that pencil? It's quite nice, isn't it? So what we have happening here is obviously a subject, Octavius. Magnam classem paratam. So here we have in the accusative adjective magnam, classem noun, and paratam participle. So we have Octavius, and there's our verb duxit, led. Okay. A large prepared fleet, or Octavius, in English rendering it, having prepared a large fleet. Duxit, led it against, contra Antonium, Antony. Now, why is this not an ablative absolute? in English we can see that we have the fleet as part of the main clause. If we were to leave this part out, Octavianus contra Antonium duxit, we would be missing what was being led. Contra Antonium being a prepositional phrase against Antony. And here we have the magnam classem, the fleet, paratam, prepared. So remember, this acts as an adjectival phrase describing something, right? So the fleet that was prepared, or the large fleet that was prepared, is the object of duxit. And you can see how those grammatical rules for the ablative absolute don't always match the English sentence rules. English does not like to use what Latin would be calling ablative absolutes. Though English is not inflected with ablatives, we still make separate clauses and relative clauses, present participles to express this idea. And some of this makes Latin very concise and sometimes precise as well. Let's make this into an ablative absolute. Octavianus and I'm putting the commas in there for ease for our grammar. Probably wouldn't see those in Latin so much. Possibly edited medieval manuscripts, things like that. So we've got magna classa parata, and it's set off nicely by commas. If we didn't recognize all three of these, the adjective, the noun, and the participle in ablative case. And cum Antonio, whoops, it's the vodka again, proelium, commissit. So there's our main verb, commissit, and our accusative, battle. And again, Antony with a preposition, with Antony. So here we have again Octavius, soon to be our first emperor, Augustus. Magna classa parata. So, having prepared a large fleet, we render this the same as the phrase above, even though that one was in the accusative. So we can see this one is ablative. Joined battle with Antony. How would we look at this to translate that, or to recognize in Latin what kind of a phrase that is? So it's again attendant circumstances, magna classa parata. So we can say with, because this is a passive, a large fleet, having been prepared we can say after he had prepared a large fleet. We can say when he had prepared a large fleet. Or we can say as he had prepared a large fleet. So all of these will work depending on what the Latin meaning is, the context around it. They're very subtly different in English, whereas the Latin, we have exactly the meaning in the ablative. We have time when, cause or attendant circumstances. And we can render those differently in English, depending on whether it's time, cause, or circumstances. Here, we know the context. Octavius prepared a large fleet, and then he joined battle with Antony. If we didn't see the ablative, we could say Octavius joined battle with Antony, and that main clause can stand alone in Latin. So all of these little clues tell us that we're dealing with some flexibility in translation here. And you can see the English does not keep those rules about referring to that noun in the main clause. So where it is not referred to in the Latin at all, there's nothing about the fleet here. There's no mixing between the main clause and the ablative absolute. In English, we have all of these clauses rather than a phrase, and they definitely involve the main action. Let's do some more. I think all of those writing mistakes demand some more vodka. Let's do some that might get kind of murky. Alright, we'll turn the page in portrait and see how we go. In fact, we'll get a little bit closer as well. His rebus cognitis Caesar in Galliam profectus est. So we have his rebus cognitis. And that is our ablative absolute, recognizing the plural. So we can say after he had, when he had, as he had, on learning, these things, this business, these events, on learning about, on learning of these events, Caesar profectus est started out, made for, in Gallium, Gaul. Alright, let's try another one. Legatis iam profectis. Concilium mutatum est. I'll use a pencil again. So we have our ablative there. The legate or envoy. If it's papal legate, we could say legate. Here we're just dealing with military, we'll say envoy, or perhaps a royal envoy as well. And here we have a deponent. Right. Deponent gives us an active meaning. We're still able to use the passive participle. So we have the envoy already departed, having already departed, or that's plural, the envoys having already departed. When the envoys had departed, we'll use when to show you that we can do this without a cum and subjunctive clause. When the envoys had already departed, and we really don't have to put that in there, that's kind of for emphasis, the em. Concilium mutatum est. The plan, concilium mutatum est, was changed. And we have just a straight passive there. So there's our example of putting a deponent in to use an active sense with our passive participle, or perfect passive participle. Let's do some more. What other things can arise when we're translating? Let's do some English to Latin. So, thinking about our deponents, if we want to put an active sense. Advancing to the nearest hill, they pitched camp. Now remember, the rule about the elements not being referred to in the main clause does not apply in English. It only applies in our Latin sentence. So let's see what we have. Easily enough, we have advancing to the nearest hill. In English, this is a present participle, advancing to the nearest hill, and we've got a clear subject, they. This is describing they. So what can we say? Can we use an ablative absolute? If we want an active sense, we have to use a deponent. So advancing progradior is a good deponent there. So to the nearest hill, add proximam colem, and progressi. They pitched camp castrum ponerunt. And remembering that we have to keep castra in the plural. Castra ponerunt. Here we have our participle, accusative, and progressi, goes with the they. So in our Latin, we can tell that this is part of the main clause. The advancing to the nearest hill, they are pitching the camp. All of this is describing they. It is an adjectival clause using the active deponent participle progredior. Alright, let's try another English to Latin. Let's say we'll use another present participle in English. Launching their ships. And they withdrew to a nearby island. We've got another they, a pronoun, so we don't necessarily need to iterate that in Latin. It will be included in the verb, just like ponerunt. We have this phrase here, launching their ships. Now, can we get away without that phrase? They withdrew to a nearby island. Launching their ships can be a time when they launched their ships. It can be a cause, as they launched their ships, or attendant circumstances, with the ships having been launched. They withdrew to a nearby island. This tells us we can use an ablative absolute. Alright, so ships in the ablative, navibus, deductis, and there's our ablative absolute, ad proximam insulam referterunt. They withdrew to a nearby island. And then we have our ablative absolute rendered in Latin. So what you have to do is disentangle it in the English sentence. Find out what the main clause is and ask if that is necessary. If that bit there, that phrase is necessary. Let's do another one. Alright. Crossing the threshold. The man entered the house. Alright. Find the main action. The man entered the house. This part, we know, doesn't relate to the main clause. It relates to it for time when, cause or attendant circumstances. But the main clause can still stand alone. Therefore, we can use an ablative absolute in Latin. Limine. Transito. vir domum intravit. Limine transito, with the threshold having been crossed, when he crossed the threshold, as he crossed the threshold. And there's our passive participle with the limine. The threshold having been crossed, the man entered the house. And let's do one last very involved one, because we've had so much vodka. Let's go English to Latin, shall we? And we'll do as attendant circumstances. Very many ships had been wrecked. As very many ships had been wrecked, not all the soldiers. Could be taken across at the same time. So there's our main clause there, the main meaning of our sentence. And I even left out a few extra words like the river, so that we can concentrate on our little ablative absolute. As very many ships had been wrecked. This is a cause, because so many ships had been wrecked. So many ships having been wrecked, with so many ships having been wrecked. Attendant circumstances. Alright, how shall we render this? As an ablative absolute. So, multissimus navibus fractis. With so many ships, very many ships, being wrecked, having been wrecked. And omenos milites. Omenos milites, all the soldiers, non simul, not at the same time. And let's use a passive infinitive. Transportari. Okay. So all the soldiers, not at the same time, carried across, taken across. And we've got possum. Potent. Camping. Poterunt. We wanted to put it in past. I won't bother doing that. So, with all the ships, very many ships having been wrecked, or attendant circumstances. And then we have our ablative absolutes. I hope you found this relaxing, and we've sat through another storm here in the study, nice and warm inside with our books and our pens and our drinking. Be good to yourself. Have sweet, sweet dreams. Be kind to others, and as always, be extraordinary.